FBI warns iPhone and Android users, stop sending texts. Okay, I know, right? Another scary headline trying to freak us all out. But this one's actually kind of interesting, and it's not just clickbait. There's something here.
Yeah, there is.
So that's what we're going to unpack today, this FBI warning.
Right.
Get into the tech behind it, figure out like what it actually means for, for us, like for our everyday texting. Like, should we really be worried?
Right. And it's interesting because this warning, it didn't just like come out of nowhere, right?
Yeah.
It's actually related to a pretty major cyber attack.
Okay.
Salt Typhoon.
Ooh, Salt Typhoon. That sounds kind of scary.
Yeah, it was a big one.
So tell me more about this. What happened?
So it was a sophisticated operation, definitely not amateurs here. And it was attributed to a Chinese group, and they targeted U.S. telecom companies.
So like our phone companies.
Exactly. And what makes this attack so significant is it has, the potential to disrupt critical infrastructure.
Critical infrastructure.
Yeah.
So like what kinds of things are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about like the things that, that we rely on every day. Communication networks, power grids, transportation systems, like all the stuff that keeps, society running.
Right. The stuff we take for granted.
Exactly.
Okay. So this was a big deal.
It was a big enough deal that the FBI and CISA, they both felt the need to issue this warning about texting security.
Okay, so that really puts things into perspective. So how does texting, like just something we do like 100 times a day, how does that fit into this whole like cybersecurity, landscape?
Yeah, so that's where things get a little technical.
Uh-oh.
But I'll try to break it down.
Okay.
So basically, the security of your text messages depends on who you're talking to.
Okay.
And what system they're using. So if you're both iPhone users, like you and the person you're texting,
right,
your messages are protected by something called end-to-end encryption.
Okay.
Through iMessage.
Right.
And the same goes for Android users, like if they're using Google Messages. But
there's always a but.
Always a but, right. So the problem is when you're texting between an iPhone and an Android, in those cases, it uses older technology.
Older technology.
SMS or RCS.
Okay.
And neither of those are automatically end-to-end encrypted.
Okay. So is it kind of like, I'm trying to think of like a good analogy. Is it kind of like sending a postcard versus like a sealed letter? Like anyone could potentially peek at it.
Exactly. That is a perfect analogy.
Okay.
Like anyone along the way can just like read your message. And that's why this vulnerability, like this cross-platform vulnerability, it's a big deal.
Especially after
an attack like Salt Typhoon.
Yeah. Okay. I think I'm starting to get it, like, the bigger picture here. But before we go any further, can we just break down, like, what exactly is end-to-end encryption?
Sure.
Why does it matter so much? Because, like, I hear that term, like, all the time, but I don't really know if I actually, like, fully grasp it.
Yeah, no, it's one of those terms that gets thrown around a lot. But basically, end-to-end encryption is like having a secret code.
Okay.
That only you and the person you're talking to know.
Right.
So your message gets scrambled.
Yeah.
Like it's turned into like an unreadable mess, right?
Okay.
Before it's even sent. And then only the recipient, like the person you sent it to, they have the key to unlock it.
Ooh. Okay.
So even if someone like intercepts the message along the way, like all they'll see is gibberish. They can't actually read what you wrote.
Wow, that's actually really cool. So without end-to-end encryption, my texts are basically out there, like for anyone to see.
Potentially, yeah.
Okay. That's kind of unsettling.
It is. And it's not just hackers that we have to worry about.
Right.
Without encryption, governments or even the telecom companies themselves could potentially access your messages.
Oh, wow.
And that's why the FBI is really pushing for what they call responsible encryption.
Responsible encryption. That's kind of like a weird term, right?
It is, yeah.
Well, what do they mean by that?
So it's essentially a way to balance, security with access. So they want encryption to be there to protect our data, right? But they also want, a way for law enforcement to access that data through legal means if they need to, like if there's an investigation.
I see the tension there, right? Like on one hand, I want my conversations to be like private. But on the other hand, like, we want law enforcement to be able to like do their jobs and catch the bad guys. Right. But isn't like giving them access, like, isn't that basically like creating a back door? Like, doesn't that kind of defeat the whole point of encryption in the first place?
Yeah, that is a valid concern.
Yeah.
And it's at the heart of a huge debate, right, around privacy and security.
Yeah.
There are strong arguments on both sides.
Yeah. So what is like the average person like what am I supposed to do? Like I can't exactly tell my friends to switch phone operating systems, right?
Right.
Just so our texts are secure. So what are some like practical things like what can people actually do to like protect themselves?
Well, the good news is there are alternative messaging platforms out there that offer end-to-end encryption, um, even for cross-platform messaging.
You mean like WhatsApp and Signal?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So those platforms, they prioritize security, and they make sure your messages are protected, regardless of what type of phone you or the other person is using. In fact, even the FBI, with their whole responsible encryption thing, right?
Yeah.
Even they acknowledge that these apps offer a higher level of security than standard texting.
Okay, that's good to know. But what about the future of like regular texting? Is it just destined to be insecure like forever? Because I've heard about this thing called RCS that's supposed to be like the new standard, right?
Right. Yeah, RCS it's being touted as the successor to SMS.
Okay.
And one of the big promises is that it will include end-to-end encryption eventually.
So there's hope. Like regular texting might actually become secure someday.
Maybe, yeah.
But like when when is that gonna?
That's the million-dollar question. There's no official timeline yet. Just a lot of promises. So for now, those dedicated secure messaging apps like WhatsApp and Signal, they're still your best bet. If you want to be sure your conversations are truly private.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So what we've learned so far is that texting between iPhones and Androids, it has this like inherent risk, right? Because there's no end-to-end encryption.
Yep.
But there are alternatives out there that prioritize security. But it makes you think, right? Like if that Salt Typhoon attack had like actually been successful
Yeah.
and those networks like had been disrupted, we might all be scrambling for those secure messaging apps like right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a good reminder that our digital world is becoming more and more vulnerable.
Uh-huh.
And we need to be thinking about these things. Like we need to be proactive about protecting our privacy.
Yeah.
It's not about being paranoid. It's about just being, informed
Yeah.
and making conscious choices.
I couldn't agree more. And that brings us back to the FBI warning, right? It seems like they're really trying to raise awareness about these issues and encourage people to like actually think about this stuff.
Right.
But there's another side to this whole debate, right? Like
Yeah.
that tension between privacy and security that we talked about earlier. It's such a complex issue.
It is.
Like there's no easy answers.
No, there really aren't.
It raises some really important questions.
Yeah, it does.
Like in the name of security, how much access should we be willing to give up?
That's a big question.
It is. It's a big question. And I think it's a question worth exploring a little bit further. We've already covered a lot of ground today, but I really want to dive deeper into this whole debate about privacy versus security and what it means for the future of digital communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
But before we do that, I think we need to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we've talked about this like tension, right, between privacy and security, but how does that actually like play out like in the real world?
Yeah.
Can you give me like some examples?
Sure. Let's imagine like a scenario where law enforcement is investigating a serious crime.
Okay.
Right. And they think that there's like crucial evidence
Yeah.
hidden in someone's encrypted messages.
Mm-hmm.
So without access, they might hit a dead end.
Yeah. Yeah.
In their investigation.
Yeah.
On the other hand, imagine like a journalist
Okay.
working in a repressive regime,
Mm-hmm.
and they rely on secure messaging apps
Right.
to talk to their sources
Mm-hmm.
without fear of being spied on.
Right.
But if those apps have like a back door,
Mm-hmm.
their safety and the integrity of their work could be compromised.
Yeah. Wow. Those are some pretty powerful examples. It really highlights how complicated this whole thing is. Like,
Yeah.
is there even a way to find a solution? Like that makes everyone happy.
Yeah, it's a tough one for sure. Some people argue that like technological solutions, like privacy enhancing technology,
Enhancing technologies.
Yeah.
Okay.
those could offer like a middle ground.
Mm.
So these technologies, they aim to protect privacy while still allowing for some degree of access, you know,
Uh-huh.
under certain circumstances. But it's still a work in progress.
Okay. That's fascinating. It seems like we're talking about like way more than just like our own personal texting, habits here.
Right.
This has like implications for freedom of the press,
Yeah.
government surveillance, criminal investigations, even like national security.
Absolutely.
It's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
And it's a conversation that's only going to become more important
Right.
as technology keeps evolving.
Yeah.
And we become even more reliant on all this digital communication.
Right. Speaking of evolving technology, let's circle back to RCS for a second.
Look, you mentioned earlier that it's supposed to be like the new standard for texting.
Right.
And that eventually it might include end-to-end encryption.
Right.
If that happens, could that potentially solve this whole like cross-platform security issue?
It could. It could be a game changer, really.
Okay.
If RCS can actually do what they're promising, if they
Yeah.
can actually deliver on robust end-to-end encryption,
hmm
it would make standard texting much more secure for everyone, like regardless of whether you're using an iPhone or an Android.
That would be awesome.
Yeah, it would.
It would just like make things so much simpler.
Yeah.
But is it really realistic? Like to
Yeah.
think that all these companies, like all the big players,
Yeah.
will actually like get on board with this because they all have like their own interests, right?
It's true. There are a lot of moving parts.
Competing interests, telecom companies,
Yeah.
tech giants, governments, they all have a stake in this.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to say how it's all going to shake out.
So it sounds like we're just gonna have to wait and see.
Pretty much.
Okay. In the meantime, what are your thoughts on the FBI's recommendation to use these like secure messaging apps? Do you think it's realistic to expect like everyone to switch over?
Well, it's definitely a good step.
Okay.
It's a step in the right direction. And while those apps they do offer like excellent security,
Uh-huh.
there are challenges to getting everyone to use them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not everyone is comfortable with the idea of using like these alternative platforms.
Right.
Some people might just not want to download like
Yeah.
yet another app.
Right.
And others might have, privacy concerns about the companies behind the apps.
Yeah, I know I've had those concerns. It's almost like a catch-22, right?
Yeah.
You want to like protect your privacy,
Mm-hmm.
but you're also like wary of giving your information to like yet another company. It's a tough balancing act.
It is.
But I think what's really interesting about this whole conversation is how it forces us to think about like the technology we use every day. Like
Right.
we often just take texting for granted.
Mm-hmm.
But it's clear that there's a lot more going on behind the scenes than we realize.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's easy to think that like convenience like equals security.
Right.
But as we've seen, that's not always the case.
Yeah.
So taking the time to understand how these different messaging systems work
Right.
and what the limitations are, that's really important.
It's like you said before, it's not about being paranoid.
Right.
It's about being informed.
Exactly.
And having that knowledge that allows us to make better choices.
Yeah. About our digital lives.
Exactly. So where do we go from here? We've explored the technical stuff, the security risks, the potential solutions, the ethical questions. What's the key takeaway? Like what do you hope people will walk away with?
I think the most important thing is to remember that we're not powerless, in this digital age.
No.
Like we have a say in
Yeah.
how our data is used and how our privacy is protected.
All starts with awareness. Right?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
Once we understand the risks,
Uh-huh.
then we can start taking steps to deal with them.
Right.
Whether that's choosing more secure messaging apps or pushing for stronger privacy laws or even just being more careful about, what we share online. Like every little thing helps.
Yeah. This whole conversation has been really eye-opening for me. It's made me realize that I need to be more proactive
hmm
about my own like digital security, and it's given me a lot to think about. Yeah.
In terms of this whole like privacy versus security debate,
It's a debate that's not going away anytime soon,
right?
and it's one that we all have a role to play in.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Hmm.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought-provoking question.
Okay.
In an age of increasing digital surveillance, how do we strike a balance between security and privacy?
It's a question that goes beyond just, texting.
Right?
It's really a question about our digital lives
Yeah.
and the kind of future we want to build.
And it's a question that we each need to grapple with. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
This was a really insightful conversation. I
Hmm.
know I learned a lot, and I hope our listeners did too.
Me too.
So we really dug deep into this FBI warning,
Hmm.
about texting.
We did. I think it's safe to say that headline, what was it? FBI warns iPhone and Android users stop sending texts. I mean, that definitely got our attention.
It did, yeah. A little bit alarmist, maybe.
A little bit, but now that we understand like the nuances, it's less about fear and more about awareness, right?
Yeah, I'd say so. It's about understanding that in our world, right? Like in our hyper-connected world, even something as simple as texting,
Yeah.
it has like all these layers of complexity.
Yeah. And we've learned that those layers they're kind of invisible to us.
Right.
Like we just assume that when we send a text, it's private.
Right, exactly.
But as we've been talking about, that's not always the case.
No, it's not.
Okay.
And the reliance on these older technologies like SMS and RCS
Right.
for cross-platform messaging.
Yeah.
And the lack of that automatic end-to-end encryption.
Right.
That's a real vulnerability. And this Salt Typhoon attack.
Yeah.
That really brought that to light.
It's interesting because I think like a lot of people, I know I do this too. We tend to associate like cybersecurity threats with these big dramatic events,
Yeah.
like data breaches or system outages.
Hmm.
But this whole conversation has really highlighted how those threats can also show up in these like really like mundane everyday activities
Yeah.
like texting. Who would have thought, right?
Right. Yeah, it's true. It's a good reminder that cybersecurity, it's not just about protecting like big systems and infrastructure, right?
Right.
It's also about protecting our personal data and our privacy in all of our digital interactions, right?
Yeah.
Like even the small ones.
Absolutely. And that protection, it starts with just understanding the tools that we're using.
Right.
Knowing the difference between iMessage, Google Messages, SMS, RCS, and how like the level of security it can change depending on who you're talking to.
Right, exactly. Being aware of what each of these things, like what each of these systems is actually doing
Right. Yeah.
is really the first step.
And being proactive. Like if you're having a conversation that you need more privacy,
Mm-hmm.
consider using like a secure messaging app like WhatsApp or
Yeah.
Signal, right?
Exactly.
Or even just being mindful of what you're actually sharing via text message.
Yeah.
Like maybe save those really sensitive conversations for a different platform.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about making informed choices.
Right.
And that also means like staying informed about advances in messaging security,
Uh-huh.
like that whole thing about RCS,
Right.
potentially having end-to-end encryption in the future. So there are things on the horizon.
So there's still like hope for the future of texting. Like it might not be doomed.
Yeah, I think there's definite potential there. If RCS can deliver on what they're promising, if they can really create that robust encryption, it could be a much more secure option
Yeah.
for everyone. But for now, it's important to be aware of the limitations
Yeah.
and to take steps to protect yourself if you need to.
I think that's a great takeaway for our listeners.
Yeah.
Be aware, be informed,
Mm-hmm.
and be proactive. And maybe, just maybe, think twice before you hit send on that next text message.
Yeah. It's all about taking control,
Yeah.
right, of our digital lives and shaping a future where privacy and security can coexist.
I think that's a great point to end on.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground today. We talked about the technical stuff, the ethical dilemmas.
Mhm.
It's been a fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
And I wanna thank you for being here and sharing your expertise with us.
It's been my pleasure. This is something I care a lot about. So
Yeah.
so it's always great to have these kinds of conversations and to see more and more people like getting interested in this stuff.
Yeah. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of texting and digital security. I hope you learned something new,
Yeah.
and that you'll continue to think about these issues and make informed choices about your own digital life. So until next time, stay curious and stay secure.
Stay safe out there.